Organisations that have been involved in over the past few months looking at the underlying reasons why people from our community are participating in terrorism and extremism, and a few organisations came together along with the MPs to put a letter together to the Prime Minister to express concern at the British foreign policy that's been applied across the world.
So the letter arrived at the offices of your foundation, you scanned it and said, yes, we broadly agree with that as a pitch.
Yes.
Do you think it would make any difference if foreign policy were now to change? I mean, there are some extremists out there whose views are already deeply entrenched, aren't they?
Well, this is not about people's views about terrorism. They're two separate, distinct issues. Foreign policy is not being implemented equally across the board. For instance, in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein violated UN Security Council resolutions, we sent the armies in. When Israel is violating UN Security Council resolution, is killing innocent people in Lebanon and Palestine, we don't see the government, we don't even see Tony Blair condemning it, refusing to actually condemn Israeli actions. So what we're asking for is a bit of fairness, a bit of justice for the Muslims' lives as well as the non-Muslim lives.
So you're saying there's a distinction between this letter and the terrorism that sort of is dominating the headlines at the moment? There are definitely two separate issues.
I think they are. I think in the letter we're talking about, the government has to deal with the underlying reasons why people are attracted to terrorism, and one of them is the double standards that are applied in foreign policy. When it comes to Muslim lives, people perceive that the British government is applying its policy equally. So they are then sort of connected in so much as if you were to deal with foreign policy, that might prevent the extremist behaviour that then leads to terrorism. Yes.
Fair connection?
Yes, fair connection. If you can deal with it, if you have a fairer, just foreign policy, for example, the Scandinavian countries, they have a very open, very liberal foreign policy. They're not the target of military action, they're not the target of terrorist attacks. The reason Britain is at the forefront is because we went into an illegal war in Iraq, we illegally occupied a country, we had a war in Afghanistan, and people perceive Britain to be at the heart of the Bush strategy of global domination and the war against Islam.
And is there a distinct connection? Can you give to me examples of terrorism or terrorists who've been driven to the extreme behaviour that they engage in by our foreign policy? Or is that an assumption that the MPs and that your foundation is making?
Well, I don't think it's an assumption. I think what we're saying is that before people become radicalised, if you can take away the key chunk of their whole purpose, their whole mantra of why they encourage terrorism, if we can deal with the issue of foreign policy, then they won't have an argument to launch terrorist attacks in this country. We have to be very clear that terrorism is not condoned under Islam. Islam totally forbids the killing of innocent people, and we have to ensure that our voices get out in the public and that we re-engage with the youth, because remember, young people are not engaged with the political process. Politicians have not instigated a review of the British population voted for Tony Blair's government. Prime Minister Blair has to wake up to the reality that the vast majority of the British people has no trust in him anymore, and he needs to consider his position.